The unemployment rate remains stubbornly high. Statistics South Africa data shows unemployment for the third quarter is at 27.5%. That's up from 27.2% in the previous quarter. Economists had not expected much improvement in the unemployment rate on the back of depressed business conditions. The unemployment rate increased by a 0.3 of a percentage point to 27.5% in the third quarter. This as a result of the weak economy and low investor confidence levels, leading to poor employment creation prospects. Statistics South Africa says in the third quarter, the informal sector recorded employment gains, while the formal sector, private households and agriculture recorded declines in employment. Compared to a year ago, employment increased by 1.2%. Mamokgethi Molopyane, a Labour analyst, joins me in studio now. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. Were these numbers expected?
Yes, and much better even. We were expecting far worse numbers, so that it is just by a point of a percentage. It's not surprising. However, I think it hammers home, Zinga, the point, the argument that we are in a crisis in terms of unemployment, not just as an emerging economy, not just in South Africa, but within a whole group of emerging economies. We have the highest unemployment among young people, even within our peers. In BRICS, it's even worse. So it's a crisis. I always write in columns that this youth unemployment is a crisis. Stats SA today, the numbers of Stats SA today, when unpacked thorough, they show that.
Let's go to that youth unemployment, which is a crisis. We've seen President Cyril Ramaphosa's Youth Employment Services Initiative, that was launched this year. When are we going to see, if at any time, the effects of that on youth unemployment? I mean, it should by now, if indeed it's up and running and it's being implemented and there are programs that are aimed at taking the youth out of unemployment. By now it should. We should be seeing that being reflected in Stats SA's numbers, but we are not. And even more telling is the fact that behind the scenes, when we're discussing at the job summit, when the job summit was being discussed, it seems like youth unemployment was a by discussion and not the core discussion. I emphasize the importance of centering solutions of unemployment among young people, because in the next 5 or 10 years, South Africa's population will be mostly made of young people. And Stats SA's number today, it's alarming. For me, I don't know about the policymakers and the decision maker, but for me, it's an alarming number that we have. The number of unemployed youth or young people is twice the amount of the national average of unemployment. We are at 27, meaning youth unemployment is over there at 54–55%. That is telling in an economy that wants to see itself as an emerging economy, but also that is telling in an economy that just had an investment summit, a job summit, that if even those commitments, even with those monies that those companies are putting forward, by the way, unless they center around how do we get most of our unemployed youth working? How do we get more than 500,000 graduates who are unemployed working? It won't solve the broader unemployment crisis. When we look at unemployment, I think sometimes we tend to look in silos. So we say, oh, the unemployment number is terrible. And then we'll say, oh, you know, our education system is deteriorating. We're not looking at it holistically. But if our basic education is struggling, which it is, if our higher education, some universities are getting ranked lower than they were before, that all feeds into the kind of employees that are being produced and the kind of skills that are being produced or not being produced. So when we look at the unemployment problem, where else do we need to look besides just saying, okay, for instance, youth employment? Where are the other places that we need to look to change this number, and how long will that take? It's something that should be ongoing, and if we are only going to look at it now or in the coming future, we perhaps are dooming our youth and condemning them to a life of begging for food. But we should be focusing, as you had said, on basic education, on higher education, and the mismatch then. If the private sector is saying there is a mismatch with skills that we need, how then do you see on social media graduates who have engineering, actuarial science degrees looking for employment? So, and yet
the private sector in those industries are saying we cannot find people to employ. So obviously there's a disconnect. But then again, even with the investment summit, critics of it can will be right to say you didn't need to wait for so long to plug money back into the economy so that we get the economic machine grinding and working. But you waited for things to be this bad and hoping that only now, because there's a new president, you think things will be better. Argument is that even with the President Mbeki's administration, when policy was seen to be pro-business, business sector was not creating as many jobs as they were expected to. As such, the government was carrying the burden of being the biggest employer. It's unsustainable, as we know, given the balance of payment that government has, given the debt that government has. It's unsustainable for government to be the biggest employer in the long run.
Thank you so much for your time, Mamokgethi Molopyane.